3 years ago, I believed my marriage was perfect. We were your average middle-class couple, moderately comfortable, in good health, with a pleasant life and 2 children, a 16-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter at that time. I thought we shared a fulfilling relationship, but we were experiencing one of those inevitable strained periods that married couples face. We were both overwhelmed with career responsibilities, failing to dedicate sufficient intimate time together, and addressing some behavioral challenges with my daughter, so household stress was becoming increasingly evident. I detected my wife spending substantially more time on her phone with what she claimed were work colleagues, but initially I dismissed it as harmless. I started making conscious attempts to leave work earlier, take on more household responsibilities, and strengthen our emotional connection. Yet over several weeks, the gap between us only expanded. I unexpectedly found suspicious messages when I borrowed her laptop to check my email. Her messaging app was still open, and there were numerous concerning exchanges with a coworker from her office. The conversations weren't explicitly inappropriate, but I could tell many messages had been deleted based on the timestamps and conversational flow. I made a mental note to pay closer attention and attempted to repair our relationship. The next morning, I took a day off to complete several home improvement projects I thought would please her, and left heartfelt notes expressing my gratitude for our life together. Yet again, she was completely absorbed in her phone in the kitchen while I worked. I retrieved her old phone from our drawer, accessed her messaging app, and witnessed in real time as my wife belittled me to this other man. They were mocking my appearance, habits, and personal struggles I had confided in her about. Beyond that, while there wasn't overt sexual content, there were undeniable romantic undertones throughout their conversation, especially when she was criticizing our intimate relationship. I captured several screenshots, but missed substantial content because she deleted messages as their exchange continued. I wasn't emotionally stable enough to confront her immediately. I remained in the garage until she fell asleep and had several glasses of whiskey. I called in sick the following day and spent it reflecting, drinking, and contemplating my next steps. When my wife returned home and questioned what was wrong, I claimed I was fighting a stomach virus. Minutes later, I observed her phone as the devastating conversation resumed. This initiated nearly 3 weeks of me collecting evidence, drinking heavily, and emotionally detaching from the marriage. I recognized there was no possibility of recovering from this level of deception. The messages had now become explicitly intimate, with my wife fully participating and the other man repeatedly professing his love. I connected with a private investigator, explored potential outcomes, and began implementing my strategy. Then everything took an unexpected turn. From their messages, I discovered the other man was traveling to our town for a weekend of passion with my wife at an upscale resort. I was missing certain details, which they presumably discussed verbally, but I gathered enough to determine when and where they would meet. As anticipated, the following evening, my wife was unusually affectionate toward me. She announced her desire for a girls' retreat at a nearby spa resort to decompress, promising that upon her return, we could focus on rebuilding our relationship. I pretended to support her plan, assuring her it was exactly what she needed and that I'd do anything to strengthen our marriage. I contacted the investigator and instructed him to maintain surveillance throughout the weekend, documenting everything thoroughly. Then I endured the most excruciating 10 days of my existence. After all this betrayal, most of my affection for her had vanished, replaced by an intense feeling of betrayal unlike anything I'd experienced before. The fateful weekend arrived. I took Friday off work. I gathered important documents and valuables and secured them in a safe location. I downloaded and organized numerous screenshots of their conversations onto a secure drive. Then I waited anxiously because I couldn't bear being home when she departed. She messaged me that she was leaving and sent her love. I wished her a wonderful weekend. I received the first update from the investigator around 8 p.m., showing photos of them entering the resort together. I felt physically ill, but needed to see the evidence with my own eyes. I drove to the resort parking lot and spotted her car next to an unfamiliar vehicle with out-of-state plates. Whatever composure I had maintained completely dissolved. I approached the resort entrance, but stopped myself from going inside. Instead, I returned to my car and experienced a complete emotional breakdown. I drove home in a fog of anger and despair. The investigator continued sending updates throughout Saturday. The couple dining, walking by the lake, entering their room carrying champagne. Each image crushed me further. Sunday morning, everything changed dramatically. The investigator called. Instead of texting, he sounded rather urgent. He explained that emergency vehicles had arrived at the resort. The other man had suffered what appeared to be a severe cardiac event during the night. My wife was hysterical as paramedics performed CPR in their room. I sat in stunned silence, attempting to process this unexpected turn of events. Later that afternoon, my wife called, her voice broken and barely coherent. She claimed her friend had experienced a medical emergency during their retreat. She explained she'd be home late because she needed to speak with resort staff and medical personnel. I wondered if she would ever tell me the truth. When she finally returned that evening, she appeared completely shattered. I asked minimal questions, pretending to believe her fabricated story about her friend being hospitalized. She barely slept that night, crying intermittently until morning. 2 days later, news broke on local media about a visiting businessman who had died from a heart attack at the resort. My wife's phone rang constantly with calls from a number I didn't recognize. She ignored them all. The investigator confirmed it was the other man's wife trying to reach my wife. Apparently, the resort had found my wife's contact information in his phone. For weeks, my wife moved through our home like a ghost. She stopped communicating with colleagues, requested extended leave from work, and barely engaged with our children. I maintained the facade of the supportive husband while internally planning my next steps. After a month, I suggested she see a therapist for what I called her unusual grief over her friend. She agreed without resistance. I arranged an appointment with a marriage counselor, explaining to them privately beforehand that my wife was processing grief from an affair partner's death. During our first session, the therapist skillfully created an environment where my wife finally confessed everything. She admitted to the affair, their weekend plans, and watching helplessly as he died in their hotel room. I performed shock disbelief perfectly, though inside I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The children sensed the tension at home, but believed we were working through typical marital problems. As months passed, my wife became increasingly dependent on me, viewing me as her savior for not abandoning her after her confession. What she didn't know was that I had already consulted an attorney. During our fourth counseling session, I presented her with detailed evidence of her infidelity. I revealed the screenshots, investigators' photos, and my knowledge of everything that had transpired. I told her that continuing to deceive our children about the kind of person she was had become intolerable. She collapsed into tears, begging me not to destroy her relationship with our children. I offered her one option, a quiet divorce with terms heavily favoring me. She would move out, receive limited visitation with the children, and pay substantial support due to her higher income. With the threat of exposure hanging over her, she signed the papers that afternoon. The divorce was finalized quickly, without a hitch. I received primary custody of our children and retained our family home. My wife moved to another home in a neighboring city, seeing the children on alternating weekends. For the last 2 years, I've maintained my position as the wronged yet dignified husband. My children see me as the epitome of patience and resilience. My ex-wife views me as morally superior, forever grateful that I didn't expose her affair to everyone we know. I even benefit from her constant attempts to prove her worthiness, accepting her financial support far beyond what the divorce settlement required. But she'll never know that the night before their weekend together, I accessed her lover's medical history through methods I'm not proud of. I discovered he had a pre-existing heart condition that made certain medications dangerous. I'll never confirm how I got access to his records. I realize now I could have faced serious legal consequences for accessing his medical records without consent, a clear violation that could have resulted in severe penalties, including potential criminal charges. Had anyone discovered how I obtained his medical information, I might be sitting in a prison cell instead of my comfortable home. The investigation ruled his death as natural causes, just an unfortunate heart attack during a weekend getaway. So, was I wrong for how I handled my wife's betrayal? You can't possibly recover from that level of deception from being wounded so deeply. Yet somehow, I managed to look beyond my pain and salvage what remained of my dignity. One point I must emphasize is that I'm unquestionably the victim in this situation. I was betrayed and humiliated beyond measure. She attempted to make me appear foolish. I realize many might consider my methods excessive or even criminal. There seemed to be an understanding that I would keep her secret and she would accept the consequences. Instead of confronting her immediately, I methodically gathered evidence and waited for the perfect moment. The other man's death was unexpected, but it solved problems that would have persisted for years. Not everyone will agree with my actions, and many might consider them unconscionable, but that aspect remains particularly controversial. You rarely encounter situations resolving in this manner. Typically, when someone cheats in a marriage, they often emerge relatively unscathed from the aftermath. The betrayed spouse frequently endures additional suffering through financial hardship and ongoing connections. Most individuals wouldn't have considered the approach I took. As I mentioned, I'll never completely heal from this betrayal, but time gradually dulls the pain. I went to extraordinary lengths trying to preserve my marriage. I adjusted my work schedule, which was challenging, only to discover her betrayal with another man. Beyond the emotional affair, she proceeded with physical infidelity. She was at the resort, sharing a room with him. It wasn't merely an emotional indiscretion. She deliberately planned and executed their rendezvous. But that's my account of how karma delivered the ultimate justice to my unfaithful wife and her lover. Commentary. Well, not every cheating story will have a happy ending. In this case, the AP lost his life, and the betrayed spouse ended up getting paid, which is a good thing, I suppose. But whatever he did, like he said, to access this guy's medical record had to be shady. You can't access anyone's medical records without their consent. That's a huge violation. I never expected to discover my wife's affair because of a burst water pipe. We had been married for 21 years, no kids, just us working on our careers. She owned a hair salon that was doing really well, plus 2 houses she rented out that were completely paid off. Meanwhile, I worked at a computer store, making decent money, but nothing compared to her success. I was proud of her achievements. She worked hard for everything she had, including her job with the city that came with great benefits and a solid retirement plan. We lived comfortably in our house, which was almost paid off. Everything seemed perfect until that Sunday afternoon when our kitchen pipe burst. Water flooded everywhere while my wife was supposedly at her salon doing inventory. I called emergency plumbing services and then called her cell phone. No answer. I tried the salon number. No answer there either. Strange for inventory day. She always answered the salon phone. The plumber arrived and fixed the issue within an hour. The mess was substantial, so I decided to drive to the salon to get her help with cleanup. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed her car was missing. The salon was dark, clearly closed. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I called her cell again, straight to voicemail. Using the spare key, I entered the salon to confirm my suspicions. Empty. No inventory being done. The appointment book sat open on the reception desk. Curious, I flipped through it, noticing a pattern over the last few months. Every Thursday afternoon had an appointment blocked off with only the initials, MD, and a phone number. The same time slot every week for 3 months. The same day she claimed to have city meetings. Something didn't add up. I took a photo of the phone number. Back home, with water damage half cleaned. Then I decided to do some research on this phone number. I searched the phone number online. It belonged to a doctor at the hospital where my wife had her annual checkups, Dr. 𝗦𝘁cie𝗿𝘆. I scrolled through his profile on the hospital website. He looked to be in his mid-40s, head of cardiology. I remembered my wife mentioning her new doctor a few months back. My mind raced through recent changes in her behavior, the new clothes, the sudden interest in her appearance, the decreased intimacy between us, the constant Thursday city meetings that ran late. Really didn't know how she pulled that off. Having a regular city job, her phone always kept close. It all clicked into place like pieces of a horrible puzzle. That night, she returned home hours after the salon would have closed. When I questioned where she'd been, she claimed to be at the salon. When I mentioned calling and visiting the empty salon, her face changed. She quickly made up a story about running errands. The water damage didn't seem to concern her at all. As she walked past me to the bedroom, I knew the woman I had loved for 21 years was lying straight to my face. That made me suspicious, but I wasn't going to get all mad and yell, tell her she was lying. I was going to do what my dad taught me, dig first. I had been saving money for years, not a lot, but enough to cover emergencies. Hiring a private investigator definitely counted as an emergency. The PI came recommended by a friend who worked in the insurance industry, mostly combating against insurance fraud. We met at my job. He was professional, straightforward, and didn't judge. I handed over half his fee up front and told him about the Thursday appointments, the doctor, and my suspicions. 2 weeks was his estimate for gathering solid evidence. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I went to work, came home, and pretended everything was normal as always. My wife continued her routine, oblivious to my investigation. Every day felt like walking on broken glass. On day 10, the PI contacted me during my lunch break. He sent photos that turned my world upside down. My wife and the doctor holding hands in a park. My wife and the doctor kissing outside his home. My wife entering his home one day at about 2 p.m. On this day, she was supposed to be at work, not leaving until almost 7 p.m. The timestamp on the photos matched exactly with her supposed city meetings. The PI also discovered they had been seeing each other for nearly 2 years, longer than I had suspected, and I was absolutely devastated. Their Thursday routine was just one part of it. Sometimes they met for lunch near the hospital, sometimes at his house. Her hair salon wasn't far from his house. Once at a cabin 2 hours away for a weekend when she told me she was visiting her sister. The evidence was clear as day. Digital copies of all photos were sent to my email, along with a detailed report. I paid the remainder of the PI's fee and thanked him for his thoroughness. That night, I sat in our home office, staring at the photos on my computer screen. 21 years of marriage, 21 years of trust, all destroyed. I closed the laptop and went to bed lying next to the stranger I had married. The morning after receiving the PI's evidence, I called in to work, but told my boss I would be a little late and told him why. Just by my boss's tone on the phone, he sounded shocked, told me to do what I needed to do. He would cover for me. My wife left for her salon as usual, completely unaware that I knew her secret. With her gone, I began making my preparations. First, I contacted a divorce attorney, not just any attorney, the best one in town. My consultation was scheduled for that afternoon. Next, I gathered all our financial documents, bank statements, investment accounts, retirement plan details, property deeds, tax returns going back 5 years, everything we owned together and separately. I made copies of everything. The meeting with the attorney changed everything. Being in a no-fault divorce state, Connecticut, but does offer fault-based grounds, which means with the latter, her affair could come back to bite her. However, the attorney pointed out several key advantages in my situation. My wife's city job came with an excellent retirement plan, a plan that was considered marital property despite being in her name. Her 2 rental properties were purchased during our marriage. That made them marital assets as well. Our primary residence was also jointly owned. The attorney advised me to document everything and wait. No confrontation yet. No hints that I knew anything. We needed a strategic approach to ensure I wouldn't be left with nothing after 2 decades of marriage. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. At home, I was the same husband I'd always been. Behind the scenes, I worked with my attorney to build our case. I opened a separate bank account. I secured copies of all important documents. I documented the timeline of her affair with photographic evidence. I prepared financially and emotionally for what was coming. The hardest part was acting normal around her, eating dinner together, watching TV, weekend errands, all while knowing our marriage was already over. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before, how she checked her phone constantly, how she always had excuses for being late, how her eyes lit up when certain texts came through. Each observation was another knife in my heart, but I stayed the course. The attorney advised waiting until we had everything in place. Patience would be rewarded. After 3 weeks of preparation, we were ready. The divorce papers were drawn up. I thought of moving to a new place, but my attorney told me not to move. The financial analysis was complete. The evidence was organized. It was time for the confrontation. The confrontation happened at her salon after closing time. I chose this location carefully, the very place where her appointment book had first revealed her betrayal, the very place she used as cover for her affair. I arrived 15 minutes before closing and watched through the window as she finished with her last client. The folder in my hand contained everything, divorce papers and evidence. Once the client left, I entered. The bell above the door announcing my unexpected arrival. Her surprised smile quickly faded, seeing my expression. I locked the door behind me and flipped the sign to closed. Without a word, I walked to her station and placed the folder on the counter in front of her mirror. She looked confused as she opened it. I just stood there, looking at her with my hands in my pocket. Page after page of evidence, photos of her with the doctor, timestamps, locations, the complete timeline of their affair. Her reflection paled in the mirror as she flipped through each damning page. The scissors in her hand clattered to the counter. Behind the evidence lay the divorce papers. Her hands shook as she read through the asset division I was requesting. Half of her retirement plan, our house, half the value of her rental properties. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I didn't flinch. I placed a pen next to the folder. The next hour was filled with tears and explanations I didn't want to hear. Damn near 2 years of lies condensed into desperate excuses. I remained calm and firm. The evidence was undeniable. The choice was simple. She could sign the papers and we would proceed with an uncontested divorce, quick, relatively private, or she could fight it and I'd be forced to show the evidence to everyone, family, friends, and co-workers if I had their contact information. It wasn't blackmail, it was leverage. 3 days later, she signed the papers. 1 month later, our divorce was finalized. I got the house. I got half her city retirement plan. I got a fair portion of her other assets. She moved into one of her rental properties. The doctor apparently wasn't interested in a divorced woman with financial problems. Their affair ended during our divorce proceedings. I sold my half of the rental properties back to her at market value. I didn't want anything to do with her rental properties. The money went into my retirement fund. It's been a few months since the divorce. I still live in our house, though I've redecorated. No more reminders of her. I kept my job at the computer store. Life is different now, but not worse. Sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate scheme. Sometimes it's just making sure you don't get taken advantage of twice. First by the affair, then by the divorce. 21 years of marriage ended because she couldn't be honest. But I made sure those 21 years were not wasted, at least not financially. Thanks, Tony, for sharing my story. Much love. For nearly 2 decades, I believed I had won the marriage lottery. My wife and I built what I thought was an unshakable bond, raising our 2 daughters who now live independently. We met in our 30s. Her nursing career was just taking off, and I was settling into my government contracting role. The early years flew by in a whirlwind of diaper changes, soccer games, and family vacations. She transitioned from hospital work to home health care, chasing a modest pay increase that seemed innocent enough. Our routine was comfortable and predictable. We shared passwords, kept our finances transparent, and never went to bed angry. The sex was consistently satisfying, even after 19 years, something my poker buddies claimed was rarer than winning the actual lottery. When our youngest left for college, we rediscovered each other as a couple rather than just co-parents. Date nights became a weekly ritual, and we spoke of traveling once retirement rolled around. We had weathered the typical marital storms, money troubles after the 2008 crash, her father's slow decline from Alzheimer's, my brief health scare at 49. Each challenge seemed to fortify our connection rather than strain it. Even our arguments followed a predictable pattern. Voices rarely raised, compromises quickly reached. Then came the business trip that would unravel everything. The military contractor summit was only supposed to last a weekend. Fly out Friday morning, return Sunday evening. I called her immediately after checking into the hotel, already missing her familiar voice. No answer. I tried again that evening. Still nothing. By Saturday afternoon, my concern had evolved into something darker, a gnawing suspicion I couldn't articulate. When she finally called back Saturday night, her voice carried an unfamiliar edge. She claimed to be swamped with patients, an explanation that immediately raised red flags. Weekend shifts had never been part of her home health care routine. I questioned this sudden change in her schedule, and her response was defensive, bordering on hostile. That call ended without our customary expressions of love, a first in our marriage. The woman who greeted me Sunday night wasn't the one I'd left behind. Her embrace felt mechanical, and she didn't even smile when she saw me. She usually did. I commented on the change, concerned something might be genuinely wrong. She dismissed my worry with a claim of fatigue, already turning away from me both physically and emotionally. Monday morning, she left without our usual goodbye kiss. By midday, a lengthy text appeared on my phone, full of apologies and explanations about work emergencies. That evening, she overcompensated with my favorite dinner and initiated sex for the first time in months. Something felt a little strange. I don't know why, but it didn't feel genuine, but I pushed the feeling away. We slipped back into our routine, though occasionally I'd catch her smiling at her phone, quickly looking up and locking her screen when I got close. Her explanation was always the same, just looking at memes, nothing worth sharing. Thursdays became her late nights at work. Administrative duties, she claimed. Our youngest daughter mentioned trying to reach her mother repeatedly without success. She found it strange, noting that her mother always answered her calls. I defended my wife reflexively, citing her increased patient load. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Then came the morning I discovered the condom wrapper while taking out the garage trash. My hands trembled as I snapped a photo of the damning evidence. We hadn't used condoms since trying for our first daughter. That night, I studied my wife as she moved around our kitchen, wondering if 19 years of memories had been built on quicksand. She caught me staring, mistook it for desire, and kissed me deeply. Even after her kissing me, I still felt something was wrong. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. As soon as her car disappeared down our street, I began my search. Our bedroom revealed nothing unusual. Her dresser drawers contained the same sensible underwear she'd always worn. The bathroom cabinet housed her regular medications and skincare products. Her home office yielded nothing suspicious, just patient files and nursing journals. I logged into our cell phone account, scanning through the call logs with mounting dread. 3 numbers appeared repeatedly, always after midnight or early mornings when I was asleep. One had a 478 area code, Macon, where she occasionally claimed to visit patients. Another shared our local 404 exchange. The third had an unfamiliar 912 area code from Southeast Georgia. I wrote down all 3, heart pounding against my ribs. The smart move would be hiring a professional. I found a divorce attorney in Atlanta and made an appointment for that afternoon. She wanted to know what brought me in. I shared my discoveries, the condom wrapper, the mysterious phone numbers, and my wife's personality shift. The attorney wanted to know what my gut was telling me. My answer was simple and devastating. I didn't think my marriage was on solid ground anymore. She outlined my options: direct confrontation, GPS tracking, or hiring a private investigator. I chose the path that would provide irrefutable evidence. The PI charged more per hour than the lawyer, but promised results within 2 weeks. He recognized the pattern immediately upon reviewing my notes, assuring me he'd contact me once he had concrete evidence. I returned home feeling hollow, moving through our house like a ghost. That night, I told my wife I loved her. She echoed the sentiment without looking up from her phone. The PI called exactly 9 days later with news. He had what I needed and wanted me to come to his office. The evidence was laid out methodically: photographs, video clips, time-stamped reports. My wife entered a married colleague's house one afternoon, leaving 3 hours later looking a mess, meeting a different man behind a laundromat another time, their embrace leaving nothing to interpretation. Most devastating was the final piece of footage the private investigator showed me: a hotel rendezvous with a third man, lasting exactly 52 minutes. 3 different men in 1 week, the private investigator noted. I had a weird feeling reviewing the evidence, as if watching someone else's life imploding. I asked what my next steps should be. The PI recommended consulting with my attorney before confronting my wife. I scheduled another meeting with the lawyer the following morning. She reviewed the private investigator's findings with a grim expression. She explained that Georgia being a no-fault divorce state, but I can file on fault-based grounds, gave me significant leverage in divorce proceedings with this evidence. We filed the paperwork that afternoon: no alimony, equitable asset division, citing irrefutable evidence of adultery. For 2 more weeks, I maintained our domestic fake married life, sharing meals, watching TV together, saying goodnight. I slept in the guest room, claiming back pain. She didn't question this arrangement. The process server delivered the divorce papers to her workplace on a Wednesday. I came home early, packing a small bag for a hotel stay, giving her space for the inevitable confrontation. But she never called. Instead, when I returned home Friday evening, half our closet was empty. Her toiletries had vanished from the bathroom. On the kitchen counter sat the signed divorce papers and her house key. No note, no explanation, no fight. She had simply disappeared from our life together, as if our 19 years had meant nothing. After that, the divorce was finalized quickly. My attorney told me divorces don't usually happen this fast. She didn't contest a single condition. I kept the house and my retirement accounts. She took her car and half our savings. Neither of us requested alimony. Our daughters were bewildered by the sudden split, but I kept the details vague, promising to explain when they were ready to hear it. As for the married man, I anonymously mailed his wife copies of the private investigator's photographs. His karma wasn't my responsibility, but his wife deserved the same truth I had fought to uncover. 6 months later, I sat alone in the house we shared, surrounded by memories that now feel counterfeit. The betrayal still stings, but it's gradually being replaced by something unexpected: freedom. I no longer check phone records or listen for late-night movements. I sleep soundly for the first time in months. Sometimes we build our lives on foundations we believe are solid, only to discover they were probably sinking long before we knew. 19 years of marriage taught me many things, but the most valuable lesson came in its ending. Trust your instincts, verify your suspicions, and never sacrifice your dignity for someone who has already surrendered theirs. The perfect life I thought we had was merely a mirage. The real perfection I'm discovering lies in the authenticity of starting over. My commentary: men, I want to leave you with this. You are human. Don't be afraid to grieve. 19 years with someone is a long time, and not every man will leave at the first sign of trouble. But in reality, when it comes to infidelity, sometimes a first-class exit is the only way to preserve your dignity and self-respect. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you value yourself enough to not accept betrayal. Healing will take time, but your peace of mind is worth the journey. This story was submitted by a listener yesterday, April 22nd, 2025. Thank you for sharing your story with us. He says, "This story began likely before you were born. I had a best friend, and we grew up like brothers. We went fishing, hiked, shot pool, worked on cars, back in the day when you actually could. When he was 16, he dropped out of school and ran off with a 20-year-old woman. He told me they drove down to Mexico to get married since he was underage. They got there and discovered they didn't have enough money to pay for a wedding, so they decided to return and simply tell everyone they were married. They rented a garage apartment, and then he needed a job. At the time, Vietnam was raging, and even though he had a hearing issue, most employers wouldn't hire you if you were able to be drafted. They simply didn't want to spend the money training you only to have you drafted. The only job he could find was working nights at a gas station. Back then, they were all full service, and many were open all night, so he took it. He wasn't making much, and sometimes they simply didn't have enough money for bills. He told me one week they were so broke, all he could afford was a bag of potatoes, so they ate potatoes all week. A few years rolled by, and he had found a good job as a machinist. He bought a small, older home, and they had their first baby. I had gotten married and had 2 of my own. We always kept in touch. Then suddenly he seemed to have dropped off the grid. I called and got no answer. I drove by his home and no one was there. Weeks went by. Then one night I got a call from him. I said, "Man, where have you been?" He replied that he had been in a rest home. What? He said he didn't want to talk about it over the phone, but that he'd come over and explain. He arrived and we sat in the dining room, and he began this tale. It jumped back to the time when he still lived in the garage apartment and was just starting out. He told me about what had happened. He began with his brother. Now I knew his brother, and he was one of those truly sleazy individuals. He seldom worked, but always managed to find an older woman who he could move in with, use her car, and even use some of her money, at least until they got wise and tossed him out. Just painting a picture. One day he came over to my buddy and took him aside and told him his wife was cheating on him. My buddy refused to believe him, but he continued. He said, "When you run out of cigarettes, haven't you wondered why she still has some? And when you're flat broke, she still has change in her pockets." He said, "I'm telling you, as soon as you leave for work, a guy is coming to your home." My buddy said he still couldn't believe it. That night he got ready for work as usual and then drove off, but he parked on the next street with a view of his apartment. 15 minutes later, a car pulled up and a guy got out and went in. He was a lot more patient than I would have been. At any rate, he waited until the guy left and then followed him home. After that, he went to a friend's house and asked to borrow his gun. His buddy asked why he needed a gun, and he told the story and that he intended to kill the guy. His friend refused to loan him a gun, so he decided to get one from another friend, and the first rode with him. He asked again for a gun, and the second guy asked the same question, and that guy also refused. Fortunately, I didn't own a gun at the time. At that point, he decided to simply beat the guy to death, and believe me, he was more than capable enough to do that. At any rate, the three of them drove back to the guy's house. He said that when he arrived, the guy's parents had some kind of party going on. He jumped out of the car and confronted the guy out in the yard and started beating on the guy. The guy was begging him not to kill him, insisting his wife had kept calling him to come over. They ended up down in the ditch, with the guy still begging while he beat on the guy. The guy's mother was out in the yard screaming. Then his two buddies jumped out of the car and grabbed him, tossing him in the back seat and driving away before the police could arrive. I wish I could have heard the guy explaining to his parents why someone was beating him out in the yard. Eventually, he got home and ran his wife off. Of course, there was all the begging and pleading. Then her father came over to talk to him. In all honesty, this was the first time I'd ever heard the statement where her father said, "We didn't raise her like this." So, that statement has been around at least since the late 60s. Eventually, with them all ganging up on him, he allowed her to return. That almost cost him his life. Now back to the good job and wife and baby. Everything seemed to be running smoothly for him. He told me he got home from work that night and no one was home. He said he figured his wife was out shopping with her mother or girlfriends. The evening went by and he started to get worried. He called her mother, who said she hadn't seen his wife. He called her girlfriends, who also said they hadn't seen her. He was now getting frantic. He called all the hospitals, thinking she might have gotten in a wreck. He called the police. No one knew anything. The night crawled by. The next day, he stayed home from work, still calling around, but he didn't get any answers. Late that evening, his phone rang, and it was one of his wife's friends. She was pretty upset and told him this story. Her cousin in the state of Alabama was seeing a married woman who refused to leave her husband. So he went to her home and knocked on the door. When her husband answered, he shot and killed him right there. He left the state, and even though the police knew who he was, they couldn't find him. Meanwhile, here in Texas, his cousin lived, so he came here. He met my buddy's wife, and they started having an affair. One day, he decided not to let her leave and told her he was going to kill her husband that Friday at 5 o'clock when he got home from work. My buddy's wife didn't say a word, but her girlfriend, who knew her husband, couldn't live with her cousin killing him. So she called to warn him. She gave him the guy's name and told him the entire story. He told me he didn't know what to do, and to tell you the truth, if it had happened to me, I don't know what I would have done. At any rate, after thinking it over, he called the FBI and asked if they were looking for so-and-so wanted for murder in Alabama. They said yes. "Do you know his whereabouts?" He said, "No, but he's coming to my home Friday to kill me." He gave them all the information. He said that Friday they parked on the street behind his home and came in quietly through his back door. At 5 o'clock, as he was warned, a guy walked across his yard and up to his door, and the FBI jumped out and took the guy into custody. Needless to say, he filed for divorce. I was amazed they didn't arrest his wife as an accessory, but she claimed she was scared of the guy and he never left her alone. Right. At any rate, my buddy got full custody of his son, the house, the car, and everything else except for his wife's car and a stereo that she wanted. At that point, it was over, and he got that much-deserved nervous breakdown. That was almost unbelievable to me, but I trusted him and wasn't a big fan of his wife. A year or so later, he met a single mother, and they ended up getting married. His buddies were all teasing him, telling him he could do far better. I told him, "She's a good woman, loves you, so don't listen to what they are saying." They've been together for 50 years now and had a few more kids. She stuck by him when he broke his back at work and has been the kind of wife every man needs. They still love each other to this day. The only thing I missed was back a year or two after he and his first wife got together. She had become great friends with my wife. My buddy told me his wife was a bad influence on my wife. I had no idea what he meant. I found out years later when she left me to enjoy her life when I had a sudden health issue. She never even asked our kids if they wanted to go with her. I recovered, and years later also found a much better woman. I understand this isn't the type of story you normally post, but it's true, and even though it's very old, some things never change. Commentary. Let me preface, not everyone deserves a second chance, but sometimes life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. Sometimes the people we trust the most end up hurting us, while strangers become our saving grace. This story reminds us that, in some cases, second chances often lead to the greatest happiness if we're brave enough to take